I grew up enveloped by images of the world coming to an end. Every Sunday, as my family attended morning and evening services at our small-town Southern Baptist church, I heard about the inevitability of the entire world coming to a sudden, terrifying end, replete with chaos and destruction that would result when all life ended and souls were transported to heaven or hell for judgment. I lived in a part of Texas favored by hurricanes, much as we do here. And twice we endured a direct hit by hurricane that, while not entirely destroying our little world, did wreak a fair amount of havoc with flooding, downed trees, snakes everywhere that had been washed up from the many bayous around us. And my father brought into our home an atmosphere of impending world's end that was the result of his having grown up in a family marred by frequent loss and tragedy, so much so that he sought to build a lifestyle to protect all of us from the dangers that he believed were ever present and always overwhelming. Most spiritual traditions include stories and beliefs about both the beginning of the world and its ending. Some present these ideas as literal. Others intend these ideas of a world's end to be understood metaphorically as images of complete change, of a conversion that alters everything. Whether literal or metaphorical, spiritual teachings about the end of the world are rich in imaginative detail as they lay out unusual landscapes, powerful beings, rivers and lakes of fire, hordes of demons, choirs of angels, battles that unfold across the entire universe. While poet T.S. Eliot might have anticipated that the world ends not with a bang but a whimper, spiritual visions head in the opposite direction so that world endings are events of great drama. Our own Unitarian Universalist tradition, having decided long ago to remain silent on the subject of world endings in favor of keeping us strictly focused on our present lives and how we live today, offers no comments about the end of the world, aside from laments and cries for justice that are raised when it seems like any possibility of a world of equity and compassion might be lost forever. This Sunday, we conclude our month-long focus on the theme of resilience, the capacity we have, to varying degrees, to navigate challenging experiences with flexibility and creativity, especially experiences that may come upon us without warning. While we may not tomorrow or ever have to face a literal ending of the world such as those endings envisioned by spiritual traditions, we do live in a time of polarization and extreme views, along with powerful capacities for broadcasting those views in ways that incite violence or behaviors that might seek to end the world. So watching the world collapse around us may not be quite as out of the question as it once was. Even further, any of us at any time may fall victim to a world ending in the form of some overwhelming experience that takes away all we've known, like a hurricane blowing through and destroying everything, like a medical diagnosis that demands every aspect of a life to change, like a loss that so dismantles all we held dear that the world remaining afterwards is unrecognizable, a barren landscape stripped of love. A world can end without lightning and cosmic battles and destroying angels and still leave us completely devastated, wondering how we'll go on living, whether we'll go on living, since living as we have been is no longer an option. What do you do when the world comes to an end? When you maybe actually or symbolically have been standing like those people we see on news clips, perhaps sometimes clips that have included some of you who are looking at the ruins of all they loved, all you were accustomed to. What can any of us possibly do then? The same Baptist church which taught us about the end of the world also taught us that our beliefs would provide protection from the ends of the world we might encounter in terms of personal hardship and loss, as well as the universal end of the world that was coming with the Last Judgment. That is, right beliefs meant a life without harm or suffering. And if harm or suffering came our way, then we were to see that as a signal that belief had gone awry, that we were not right with God. Those beliefs became a guiding story for our lives that worked well until that inevitable day came when an experience or a question came along and in effect made a crack in that comforting narrative. But whenever a crack did develop in that narrative of how right living meant happiness and safety, we learned to see that as an occasion of a wrong belief that needed to be corrected in order to return to a state of happiness and safety. Stories that keep us protected may be the most impregnable, the least susceptible to cracking, and therefore, paradoxically, the most likely to interfere with spiritual growth. We come to believe that those stories keep us safe, that they anchor our resilience, and sometimes they do work that way. But with most stories, maybe all stories, designed to protect us from the larger world and suffering, too long a time of depending on staying in one place and staying safe means that growth has ceased. And whether those are the stories of a fundamentalist church, the stories of a consumer culture, the stories of white supremacy, the stories that have become embedded in this congregation and how it views itself, any story which encourages us to minimize differences, to avoid difficult change, to keep power where it is a story that is hard to crack open and see all the reality that it is hiding. When a crack does appear, the first responses are likely to be responses that try to cover it up. Resilience is put to work as resistance. We will do almost anything to hold off change, even when the change is in our best interest. And we will do almost anything to hold off the overwhelming change that comes when a world ends. Our individual life journeys will likely lead us, whether we want them to or not, through experiences of having our own particular world's end. I've lived through the ends of my own worlds when primary relationships broke apart, when I fell into the pit of depression, when my son left home for college. Each time I've left a congregation to serve another. Regardless of whether I saw my world endings as natural and desirable or unwanted and what I wanted to avoid, the end was always painful, dislocating, risky, because I had to discern whether to let go so the ending could proceed because it did need to happen, or when I should maybe resist the ending. And as the ending unfolded, I had to further discern when to grab some means of stepping out of it, some escape route, or whether it was best for me to remain where I was, let the world end, because by remaining where I was, I could then be ready for whatever new possibilities might emerge. In other words, was the ending just an ending, or was the ending the first sign of a beginning. These days, we are getting more practice than we ever wanted at how to negotiate the ending of a world. The pandemic brought an end to a world in which we could move about freely and without risk, cracking open that story to show how little control we have over anything, and how our control could be completely upended by a microbe. Our anti-racist work keeps prying cracks in a story that comforts us with reassurance about all the good justice work we do, and therefore we don't need to look at our own hearts to see the biases that reside there. As a congregation working through a ministerial transition, the world that has been here in these walls and among the members of this church has been ending ever since Reverend Cheryl announced her decision to leave. And that ending will keep on going until you complete your interim transition and your new settled minister arrives. Worlds ending everywhere. And we can devote our resilience efforts to sealing up the cracks in the smooth lacquer of stories that allow us to feel safe and comfortable and unchanged. We can run for escape routes in order to be anywhere but here in the middle of a change. Or we can stand fast, maybe even contribute to the cracking open with questions that ask again and again, so what is really going on here? And refuse to settle for simple explanations. And when we do that, we consent to the end of the world. When an especially powerful hurricane was set to strike the part of Texas where we lived, my parents took us to the local Baptist church for shelter, figuring we would be safer there. Besides being in God's house, we would be in a brick edifice. At one point, my father gathered us to go outside, where much to my surprise, instead of howling winds and beating rain, everything was still. No wind, no rain, blue sky above. My father explained that this was the eye of the hurricane, a small place of peace in the midst of an overwhelming storm. And he said we should never assume when the eye came over that the hurricane was done with us. Instead, it would always return, often more fiercely than before. I find myself wondering now, are we standing in an eye with more storm to come? Or is the storm done and the world is over and it's time for us to clean up, rebuild? Again and again, we thought the pandemic was finished, and yet it always surged back. Again and again, we've watched action get taken to correct injustice, and for a time things are quiet, and then the next atrocity happens. Again and again, we work our way through turmoil in our personal lives, reach a place of stability, and want to believe we're all set, and then the other shoe drops. We hope all the changes that would come during an interim time are just about finished, and then a new layer of work opens up. The eye is deceptive, as my father wanted us to believe. It is tempting to think that maybe the world need not end entirely for change to come. But if we're serious about really wanting things to change, if we earnestly believe the story we've been telling and living in, the story about our community and our church and how much we desire diversity and equity, about our own lives and our desire to live with wonder, with joy, with open-hearted engagement, then we will necessarily have to accept that when the story is taken apart, when cracks in the smooth lacquer that surrounds and protects us and allows us to be safe develop, and we don't rush to patch them up, but instead push at them, widen them, we will find more of the storm coming, more disruption, more discomfort, more uncertainty, more transition, more time to live through before the new world, which is emerging from the breakup of the old world, becomes clear. And even when the first glimpses of the world that is emerging show forth, we will require one another's presence more than ever to bring it into being. Not single-handedly, but working with one another, listening, cooperating, disagreeing, coming together again and again, because we follow a vision that is too compelling to resist. The stillness of the eye eventually began to give way to the stirring of wind, and we retreated back inside the dark church. The first taste of peaceful weather made it hard to keep huddled. We all just wanted to go home. But the experience of the hurricane eye also brought us a needed respite of hope. Calm blue sky reminded us that there was a world on the other side of the hurricane, and that the storm would not last forever. Which are reminders we always need whenever we find ourselves confronting uproar in our lives, whether the ending was a chosen one or one that came upon us without warning or choice. Even those who preach a literal end to the world never claim that the ending is actually the ending, the last chapter after which there's nothing. Whether with hurricanes, visions of Armageddon, community uprisings, differences among a congregation, or an experience of loss that feels like the end of the world, the message is always a consistent one. Destruction and division is not the last word. New worlds keep coming into being. New lives are possible, however impossible that may seem at any one moment. Because the end of the world is not, in the end, the end. May it be so. Amen.